Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. We really need to talk about the plague of mass shootings that is going on in the States. Because unfortunately, there's a lot more that people haven't heard about because there's just too many to focus on. And that's a problem. So I guess let's start with the most recent spate, right? So we have the Buffalo shooting, which was an act of domestic terrorism. And then in lesser known news, there was that shooting in Dallas, and it was lesser news because the three victims were only wounded, they didn't die. But a suspect has been arrested in a Dallas salon shooting investigated as a hate crime. And then right after that, we had the unfortunate and sickening and quite frankly offensive and shameful and embarrassing events in Uvalde, Texas. And trust me, this is eventually getting its own video. And then I was hit with a deluge of news on June 1st. Shootings unfolding simultaneously right now in America at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a Walmart in Pittston, Pennsylvania, and a high school in Los Angeles, California. And I kind of want to talk about the shooting in Tulsa because 4 people are dead in the Tulsa Medical Center shooting. One of those I'm pretty sure includes the shooter himself, who apparently had trouble with back pain, and so he was deliberately targeting the doctor at the Tulsa Medical Center and decided to take a few other people out with him and then finally himself because he just couldn't bear the pain. So there's obviously a message that can be taken away from that. But that story is how I found out about another mass shooting. Today's shooting at my med school hospital in Dayton, Ohio didn't even make national news because it was overshadowed by another shooting at another hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And unfortunately, we're not even done with June 1st because apparently on that most frightful and heinous of days, important story that hasn't received much attention so far, right-wing terror threats have ended the school year in Kiel, Wisconsin. Now city infrastructure threatened as well. The City of Kiel Police Department released a statement detailing threats that were made to the City of Kiel that basically forced schools to close and to have all law enforcement on alert, basically. So, there was that, right? And then, again, somehow, it got worse. New, 5 people have been shot at a funeral in Racine, Wisconsin, while they were burying a family member who was shot. And then, because it wasn't enough already, I came across an article that made a very disturbing observation. Tulsa marks 20 mass shootings since Uvalde. So clearly, several of these which I just mentioned in passing are part of these 20. However, I think it's safe to assume that a lot of people didn't hear about several of those instances of mass shooting that I mentioned, and then those themselves are a drop in the bucket to the total of 20 that have happened since all those children died due to police inaction and incompetence in Texas. This, unfortunately, is not something that has a happy ending. I am not exactly going to be like, here's how we solve gun control and gun violence and all this other stuff, right? But what I do want to talk about are 2 specific things. The first is that in the wake of all these stories, I have to see garbage like this being promoted on Google. Top stories related to gun control. Vanity Fair. Republican congressman blames mass shootings on women having rights. From The Atlantic. Why gun control won't end mass shootings. From The Washington Post. Why so many mass shooters are angry young men. And from Global News here in Canada. Taser-equipped drones in the works to stop school shootings despite ethics concerns. What are we doing here? Legitimately asking, what the fuck are we doing here? 20 mass shootings since Uvalde, several of whom overshadowed by other mass shootings, and the horrific hate crime in Buffalo was just over 2 weeks ago. What the actual fuck is wrong with America? And then you have people like Tim fucking Pool saying, well, it doesn't matter how many dead children there are. That shouldn't, matter to your rights of the Second Amendment. Shut the fuck up, you spectacular cosmic ghoul. There is nothing sensible, sane, rational, or rights-based about any of this. This is a very clear epidemic, and it seems to really only affect America. Gee, I wonder why. When you have people like Tucker Carlson gleefully talking and spreading like crazy conspiracy theories and encouraging stochastic terrorism on his own fucking show. And then you have people like Tim Pool saying, while they're still trying to bury dead children, well, that's the price we pay for freedom. And no, it really isn't. Whether you, interpret the Second Amendment in terms of what the original part of the document stated in terms of, it's a well-regulated militia, or whether you interpret it as, hey, no, you know what, under no terms should the proletariat be disarmed by the state. Like, however you choose to view it, right? Sure, there's still a right, but clearly there is something else going on here, and no one wants to talk about it, as you saw, which is those casual top stories from, again, allegedly professional journalist places, right? We're talking The Atlantic, Washington Post. Major legacy news media corporations still refuse to talk about the actual problem and what's going on here. And unfortunately, no one is. People are saying it, whether Democrats or not. They're like, oh no, gun control is not going to happen. It can't happen. There are 20 mass shootings since Uvalde. And several of these have been hate crimes. Buffalo, Dallas, potentially Uvalde. This is a goddamn problem that seems to only affect America. And that's not to say that America is the only place with gun culture. Canada has a gun culture. You have various corners of Africa and the Middle East that have gun culture. Eastern Europe is practically famous for its gun culture. This is not a uniquely American problem in terms of people having access to and liking guns for, competition, for hunting. That is not the issue here. The issue is how it's become just this weird part of American culture, and how it's become this really grotesque, ugly, sinister thing that is dressed up in freedom and heroism. And yet, unfortunately, what's actually happening are acts of domestic terrorism. There's nothing much more to say about that except for what leads to domestic terrorism. It's people like Tucker Carlson basically encouraging stochastic terrorist events. It's people on the right doing their terrible right-wing grifter ghoul shit and basically saying, oh yeah, the Great Replacement is totally real, when it absolutely is not. It's also them saying and doing terrible, awful things, trying to make it seem like, oh, like the government's rolling back your rights, and this is why, you need your weapon to arm yourselves and protect your family. Meanwhile, and by the way, we gotta fund the police, right? You defund the police and this is what happens. Even though the cops have literally all the training and all the money and all the weaponry and all the body armor that taxpayer money can possibly buy, and they are still not actually doing their goddamn jobs. In fact, it's a point that the Supreme Court in the US ruled that these guys don't actually have to risk their lives. And as we saw with Uvalde, a spectacular failure of policing and tactics and dealing with mass shooters, despite all these people and all these students going through these drills. And unfortunately, it's not going to end. I mean, if Sandy fucking Hook wasn't the end of the debate, then there's no hope for America. A gunman could walk into a maternity ward and shoot up all the blessed little babies and pregnant mothers, and America still wouldn't do a goddamn thing about it. That is what's so infuriating, is that this cultural devotion to this warped sense of the Second Amendment and what guns are and what they mean, and people just kind of want a free license to potentially kill in the future in the name of liberty and fighting against tyranny. And unfortunately, instead, what's actually happening is to, protect, so to prevent when that day ever happens, they're letting all these other terrible things happen that are being caused by a variety of reasons. It's not just Tucker Carlson. It's not just the right-wing grifters. It is also the unfortunate system that is in place that is preventing people from getting, better jobs, actually getting healthcare coverage, financial assistance, housing assistance. All of these added pressures on life are forcing more and more people into desperation, and it's obviously clearly having a spillover effect. Why are so many shooters angry young men, according to the Washington Post or whoever it was? Gee, I wonder if a casual look around at the system we've built and maintained, I wonder if maybe that has something to do with what has been happening in America, along with the easy access to guns and the absolutely rampant racism and the rabid right-wing grifters like Tucker Carlson encouraging domestic goddamn terrorism within his own borders. I wonder if maybe all these events are actually tied together, and yet no one is brave enough, seemingly in the media at least, to talk about this and call it for what it is. And that means, unfortunately, while we've barely known about most of these mass shootings, and then the others that, were still buried beneath the surface because there were other mass shootings that we were focusing on, this is going to continue. There are going to be dozens, if not hundreds more dead Black, Indigenous, people of color, and various other minorities, whether they were gay people at the Pulse nightclub, innocent bystanders in Vegas, innocent goddamn children at Sandy Hook and Uvalde. This is going to continue, and that is what's bothering me today.